بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه. الليل. Surah Layl. First, as we always do, the preliminary comments. Surah Layl, the vast majority of scholars said that it's a Meccan surah. And it's most of those who said that it's Meccan also said that it was the 9th surah in order of revelation to be revealed. There is a minority opinion that says it's Medinan or it's partly Medinan, for reasons that I will explain in a second. Like a lot of Quranic revelation, there is often evidence or some discussion about the occasion for revelation. The occasion for revelation is always something that there's inconsistent evidence about. But there were two major opinions about Surah Al-Layl. One that said it was revealed in direct response to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, the first caliph. And while others cited a different story, which I'll mention in a second. But the majority that said that it was in response to the following events, that Bilal, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and who was a famous figure, because like a good number of the early Muslims, was a former slave. He was a Mamluk. He was also African. Bilal eventually becomes known as the first muazzin in Islam. Yeah. So he has a revered position, partly because also he had a beautiful voice and his adhan was reportedly quite beautiful. But Bilal had converted to Islam at the time he was a slave, to the great displeasure of his owner at the time. There is an unconfirmed report that he went and urinated on the idols, and that got him into trouble, although that's just one of the reports that you find there. But anyway, it's not to be, you can't put much weight on the story of his urinating on the idols. What is far more likely is that he had converted to Islam, and that his owner at the time was quite upset about that. Upon this, he sold Bilal to a group in Mecca led by a particular individual who took it upon himself to torture Bilal, to force him to convert out of Islam, and he was tortured in public. There were reports about the way that he was tortured. There are many, but the most famous of them is, the sand of Mecca is extremely hot. And it's so hot in certain times of the year that stepping on it barefoot is nearly impossible. It really does burn your skin. Well, he would be placed on the floor with a rock on his stomach. Of course, you know, you can, and quite famously, as they insisted to torturing him, saying that leave Muhammad's faith, he would keep repeating Ahadun Ahad. Ahadun Ahad meaning the one is the one. God is the one. And purportedly he would raise his finger like this as he's being tortured. This is why we raise our finger in Salah, sort of memorializing these events. The man torturing Bilal his name was Abdullah ibn Jad'an, unimportant figure. He sort of drops from history. We don't have reports of him converting to Islam eventually. Anyway, so Abu Bakr hears of Bilal's plight and goes to Abdullah bin Jad'an and says, sell him to me. And Abdullah bin Jad'an refuses, and Abu Bakr keeps offering more and more money until he buys Bilal for an exorbitant price. And of course they thought that they're selling a worthless human being. And in fact, Abdullah bin Jad'an tells Abu Bakr, the price you're paying is ridiculous for a slave. Anyway, so Abu Bakr, after purchasing Bilal from Abdullah bin Jad'an, frees him. And of course, when you buy a slave and you free a slave, then there is no return on your money. So that's one occasion for revelation, and that's the one that you find most often cited. In fact, some Tafsir will only cite this report and not discuss any other report. The second report is that there was in either Mecca or Medina, but it doesn't make sense if it was in Mecca, and I'll explain this in a second. That there was a fellow who had a very rich farm with plenty of palm trees, living next to a very poor man who was a family that obviously was destitute. And that one of the border between the lands, the territory owned by the poor fellow and the territory owned by the rich fellow, there was a palm tree that had branches that extended from the rich man's land over the poor man's land. And that dates would fall from that tree into the poor man's land. The children of the poor man would collect these dates and eat them. When the rich man found out that they're doing this, he went to the poor man and said, you have to pay for the dates that your children ate, or I am suing you, effectively. And the poor man didn't have the ability to pay for the dates. Some of the stories even say that the rich man, like a lot of rich people, their god becomes the wealth, the money itself. I mean, even if there's no logic to what they do. So the reports say that he, in fact, cut off the branch that dropped dates into the poor man's land. So if you can't pay me, then I'm just going to destroy it. Anyway, because the poor man couldn't pay for the dates, that he went to the Prophet ﷺ and said, well, what do I do? I can't afford to pay for the dates, and the children already ate the dates. So the Prophet ﷺ called the rich man and he said, wouldn't you like to have a palm tree in the hereafter, in Jannah? Well, how do I do that? He said, donate the fruit of this one palm tree. You have 1,000 palm trees. Donate the fruit of this one palm tree to this poor family. The rich man said, no, I won't. I don't want to. The Prophet ﷺ was telling, one of the companions heard about the story, one of the rich companions, so he said, well, I'm willing to buy the palm tree from that rich man. If he won't donate it, I'm willing to buy it. So the Prophet ﷺ said, that's a wonderful idea, go talk to him, see what he wants, how much he wants. So as the story goes, is that the rich fellow, knowing that this is a situation that he can take advantage of, demanded an exorbitant price for this one palm tree. And some reports say that he demanded the equivalent of, some say 100 palm trees, the worth of 100 palm trees. Some say the worth of 10 palm trees. One report says the worth of 1,000 palm trees, probably an exaggeration. But anyway, whatever it was an exorbitant price. And then as that companion goes back and forth, struggling with, this is a lot of money for just one palm tree. Eventually, he pays the price, and the fruit of that one palm tree now belongs to that poor family. That's the second story. The reason that some people have raised doubt about the second story is that this is supposed to be a Meccan surah, and the Prophet ﷺ did not arbitrate disputes in Mecca. And so either this is the Medinian surah and then that story could happen and it could make sense, or if it's a Meccan surah, then that probably, the likelihood, as in a lot of stories about occasions of revelations, is that there were always events of charity and kindness transpiring in the Muslim. Buying and freeing slaves was a very common event, and something of a moral impetus among we have tons of narratives of companions buying and freeing slaves, Muslim and non-Muslim, by the way, because of the Quranic emphasis on freeing slaves as one of the major acts that you can perform in order to attain a good position with Allah. And narratives about the dynamics between poor and rich, again, are replete in the seerah. Narratives like this, where simply a good doer or a do-gooder, what is that expression? Do-gooder. Would step in to help a destitute family are quite common. And if the surah was revealed at any particular event, there were various people who would say, well, the surah would apply to this situation. Was it an occasion for revelation in this situation? I doubt. Did it parallel, would it apply to things that would transpiring in the Muslim Ummah at the time? Most certainly. And so that type of matching, the paralleling between the surah and actual events often took place, but that does not necessarily mean that the surah was revealed to address that particular situation. Because we often, if it was revealed to address that particular situation, we would have some reliable reports from the Prophet ﷺ saying there was a revelation about this event, which we don't have. in Surah Al-Layl. So the paralleling makes sense. About please do note, whether it's an occasion for revelation or not, when Muslim memory preserved certain dynamics that took place in Medina or in Mecca, it did so because the memory represented a moral lesson for early Muslims. They didn't do it to simply narrate history. So the moral lesson is extremely important. The fact that Abu Bakr would take it upon himself to intervene to end the suffering of a slave, and then to spend an enormous amount of money buying the freedom of the slave, is supposed to be an example for us. So when someone today comes and says, well, freeing slaves was not a moral imperative, it completely undercuts the very purpose for having the Islamic tradition. Then what is the point of Islam? Then if your belief in Allah doesn't make you do acts of ihsan, or if you don't know what ihsan is, so you somehow now today argue, well, you can't consider freeing slaves to have been acts of ihsan. It is corrupting. This is a crime as bad as Islamophobes, because it's corrupting moral history. It's one thing to argue, for scholars to argue about what year the Umayyads came to power, whether this Khalifa adopted this policy, but it's completely different to corrupt the moral history. There's a big difference between the arguments about objective history, if objective history was possible, but arguments about the technicalities of history, academic, scholarly arguments. But these arguments I enjoy and I engage, but it's completely different to corrupt the moral history of Islam. To come and today and say, well, Abu Bakr did it, it doesn't mean there was nothing moral to learn from that. Similarly, the story about that rich man and the poor man, it could have been that, okay, this man has starving children, he can't pay off his debt, and everyone would say, well, suffering is Allah's qadar, this is just Allah's fate, just be patient. Like a lot of Muslims do today towards suffering. What advice do you get? Sabr, ya akhi. Sabr. But here, the narrative is that this man took it upon himself to solve the problem, and solve the problem at an exorbitant price. And he is promised a blessed state, a state of barakah, because of that intervention. Remember that the early Muslims, after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, confronted Ahl al-Tanattu', the moral underminers, the Murji'ah, who basically wanted to rob Islam of its moral imperative, who argued that as long as you're a Muslim, you go to Jannah and khalas, but other than that, just mind your own business and don't concern yourself with ihsan in society. And it was the consensus of the Muslim Ummah that marginalized the Murji'ah. The Murji'ah have re-emerged in our modern day. The Murji'ah have re-emerged in our modern day. And from my view, and Allahu A'lam, but from my perspective and my opinion, when I read these people today who tell us Islam, there wasn't a moral imperative to end slavery, when the rich are rich because it's Allah's qadar, and the poor are poor because it's Allah's qadar, and the only thing you should do is sabr. And I see this as modern day murjia, because Islam becomes pointless. Tawheed becomes pointless. If Tawheed is not going to make a difference in the way that people live, then it's a simply private matter between you and Allah and nothing else, that religion will die, and will die very quickly. Okay. And Surah Layl, by the way, underscores this point, as we all see. And subhanAllah, I mean, all the foundational surahs, and Surah Layl, among, as we talked about before, the early surahs set the foundation for the Muslim character, for khuluqul Muslim, the akhlaq that are necessary to be the building block that Allah then allowed us to see in from the story from Mecca to Hijrah to Medina, what potential this moral transformation can have. That if I put in the proper akhlaq in human beings, what potential they could have on the world scene. They can change the world. Allah, the reason that Allah had the entire legacy from Mecca to Hijrah to Medina is to give us a living demonstrative example of what could happen. Allah didn't promise us that it will happen every decade or every ummah but Allah is telling us that, listen, akhlaq is not just theory, it's not abstractness, it's not entertainment. And then the structure of Surah Al-Layl, like these moral building surahs, the early surahs that built the Muslim moral character, or the structurally they're remarkably similar. They start out with Allah getting your attention before Allah delivering the lesson, and Allah gets your attention with the qasam, by what Allah swears by. Allah doesn't swear by something haphazardly or meaninglessly. When Allah swears by something, Allah is saying, do I have your attention? Pay attention to what I am emphasizing and underscoring. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَى وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى. This duality, the duality of the night, how does he translate? The night as it enshrouds, it's actually good. The night as it enshrouds. The night as it covers, the ghasha shay is to come and cover over something, to extend and cover. So the duality of that night as it comes and enshrouds, spreading darkness, and the morning, وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى, and the morning as it brings, jala shay is to make something appear, something manifest, something like enlightenment. That is why so many scholars pointed out that the duality here is the duality between darkness and enlightenment, between ignorance and knowledge. Allah is pointing your attention to this duality in the same like duality between good and evil. The duality unites in a single reality that is necessary for existence. Put it simply, without the darkness there can be no light, and without the light, in the absence of the light, creates a darkness. So in the same way that without evil there can be no good. The duality is an intricate balance in the creation of reality. An understanding that this intricate balance cannot unfold haphazardly or accidentally is critical to Iman. Now, subhanAllah, that while the ancients, even before Muslims, the Greeks, would often reflect upon the relationship between light and darkness, day and night, the sun and the moon, and why is it that the earth has a single moon and a single sun? I mean, theoretically, Allah could have created life in a place with a couple suns, but of course, as science progresses, we have come to understand how fragile, how amazingly balanced and fragile this equation is between where the sun is and the motion of the sun and the motion of the moon and the distance of the earth from the sun and the moon, that if you tinker around with ever so slightly with anything, the entire logic of creation unfolds. I mean, I follow a lot of exotic things, exotic for other people, I guess, sort of, like aliens and all the material about what NASA finds out there and what NASA captures on film and all of that. And subhanAllah, I mean, the intricacy and uniqueness and singularity of the earth is astounding. And the meaning of وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَى وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى, seen with our modern eyes, it's truly astounding, because it is such an intricate balance. You mess ever so slightly with anything, and everything unfolds and unravels. This is then followed by another duality, which is also وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكْرَ وَالْأُنْثَى. There are a couple of things about وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكْرَ وَالْأُنْثَى that are interesting. One is that the duality forms a singularity. Unlike angels, for instance, angels are neither female or male. There's no gender among angels. But human beings were created with this duality, and so much of Allah's creation has this duality. The intricate balance between the female and male gender is necessary for the singularity of reality itself. So in other words, as Allah makes clear elsewhere, they complete each other for what humanity is. Ibn Arabi, in particularly, is the one person that comments on Surah Layl in saying that any society that degrades the role of women. Remember that Ibn Arabi, several of his teachers, of his masters, were women, like a lot of. And Ibn Arabi had a very special mother, a mother who was very instrumental in raising him. And Ibn Arabi comments about Surah Al-Layl and says, look, for any society that doesn't respect or give women their due is a society lacking in humanity. Which is a very interesting observation by our modern eyes. I mean, I don't know how people at his time, but of course it's consistent. I mean, he cites, for instance, the hadith about heaven being under the feet of mothers and all that. And he cites a whole discussion about the role of mothers and the role that the Aisha and Salama and others, the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, played in the Muslim Ummah, and he talks at length about certain figures like Rabbi Adawiyya and so on. So he's not inventing something, he's building upon something. But it is a very valid point. وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنثَى. This in itself, for those who want to understand the moral character that the Qur'an builds, if you have a society in which patriarchy is viciously out of control. In other words, it is a completely male-dominated society where womanhood is suppressed to an extent that it plays no role. It will lack humanity. In the same way that the balance between Layl and Nahar, if skewed, there will be some type of pathology, some type of fault or failure. Am I forgetting anything? Okay. There are, one of the most interesting comments I've read about وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَخْشَى وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى. I tried to find it again last night, but we've been so busy, I didn't have the time to do the type of prep work that I normally do for the Tafsir. So I couldn't, in the time we had, I couldn't find it. It was one of the Tafsir, if my memory serves me right, it was a 4th century Hijrah Tafsir. Said that وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَخْشَى وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى, that the grammatical construction leads to the conclusion that the sun is stable, which just struck me because today we know that we go around the sun, but 4th century Hijrah, I don't know. I'm not an expert in the history of science, but it was just very striking to me that he said that that in the grammatical structure is evidence that the sun has to be stable, and while the moon is not. Very interesting. Okay.
Is it because tajalla is a less active action than
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The tajalli shay is for something to be constant and be acted upon. Rather, ikhsha shay is the active form that comes, and so he said, well, it has to be that the moon is rotating, or which was very, very interesting. Okay, what time is it?
6:40.
Okay. إن سعيكم لشتى. In the building block, the moral building block that Allah is setting in the early revelations is, we, as a lot of Mufassirun actually comment on this, saying, well, why would Allah point to the obvious? We know that we human beings do very different things. But it's not the issue that you are doing different things that Allah is alerting us to. It is not that, as the translation says, that your endeavors are just diverse, but that the law of diversity is part of Allah's creation. Allah, of course, emphasizes this repeatedly by saying that if Allah willed, all of you would have believed, but that's not what Allah wills. the existence of difference and diversity is as a constant of Allah's creation as the Layl and Nahar and the male and female. And again, think about how human beings, the extent to which human beings have a difficult time navigating difference. The fact that you are different. The nature of our egos are threatened by difference. So the fact that Allah comes and emphasizes in the building block diversity, which Allah underscores it in various ways, it's again building the genesis for what will come further. There is a point here that وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكْرَ وَالْأُنْثَى, because going back to just that who has created the male and female. It is very unusual in the Qur'an that Allah swears by Allah's self. This is one of the very few instances where وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكْرَ وَالْأُنْثَى, who created the male and female, is God. And God swearing by God is very unusual in the Quran. So much so that Ibn Mas'ud contested this reading of the Quran and said, no, in Ibn Mas'ud's narration, he said it should be وَالذَّكَرُ وَالْأُنْثَى, not وَمَنْ خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنْثَى. It should be the male and female, but not who created the male and female. Most disagreed with Ibn Mas'ud. Just as a footnote, you can read a considerable amount about why Allah, when the most interesting of comments, again, that Ibn Arabi says that the reason Allah swears by Allah's self when it comes to reminding us of the creation of male and female is because at the time the Qur'an is revealed, and for many centuries, Arabs, there was a widespread mythology among Arabs that males come from the divine while females come from demons. And the Wa'd al-Banat, burying their daughters alive, the idea was that if you bury the daughter alive, then the gods will give you a male boy. And this underscores that male and female, and of course elsewhere, the Quran tells us, and Allah gives whom He wishes boys and gives whom He wishes girls. But to underscore that male and female are directly Allah's will, you're preferring one gender over another is a direct challenge to Allah's will. Several of, like Jilani, for instance, considers it a sin to be disappointed. He considers it a sin requiring istighfar, to be disappointed that Allah gave you a girl or instead of a boy. Again, the moral character, the type of ummah that is being prepared to have an impact on the world. This, by the way, this, and I emphasize this in so many contexts, but this intimacy with the Qur'an, I believe Muslims without the Qur'an are nothing. And if you develop an intimate friendship with the Qur'an, you will understand that the Qur'an built moral character. So a Muslim without morality is an oxymoron. It doesn't make any sense. A Muslim that says La ilaha illallah but doesn't understand akhlaq al-Qur'an, what the moral character, the ethical character that the Qur'an built, is an incoherent thing, and a useless thing. And I believe that is why, as Muslims, we became once we started thinking of Islam as a tribal affiliation instead of as immoral obligation. The barakah, the blessing that Allah gives a people was taken away from us. And we are what we are today. And that's why I also get very worked up when I hear people talking about Islam without ethics. Okay. Yeah, Razi commenting on Inna Sa'yakum Lashatta. Razi says, and this is, you also find this in Tafsir al-Maturidi, and you find this in Tafsir al-Wahidi, and you find this in that when Allah says Inna Sa'yakum Lashatta, that Allah is also reminding us that although your behavior is diverse, that does not mean, and the rest of the thrust of the remaining of the surah underscores this does not mean that there is no measure for goodness and the opposite of goodness. So in our modern language, it does not mean moral relativism. It doesn't mean everything is equal to everything else. Yes, your behavior is diverse, but what is good remains good, and what is bad remains bad. So for instance, Razi says, commenting on the issue of sa'i, what you will do. Just, well, there are those who will, you walk the path of khayr, and you walk the path of opposite what is khayr, and it just it says وجوه الخير كعتق الرقاب وفك الأساري وتقوية المسلمين, and so on, and then it goes on. It says that we know what good is, like عتق الرقاب, freeing slaves, and فك الأساري, freeing prisoners of war. Now, would Razi would have imagined that hundreds of years later there will come Muslim scholars that tell us, no, Islam was not committed, it was not against slavery. Again, I mean, it kills me. And these Muslims come from America. No, Islam didn't have a moral position about slavery. How? If someone like Razi writing in the medieval age, it was very clear to him that عتق الرقاب is khayr, is what goodness is, to free slaves. Did he imagine that centuries later someone is going to come and say, no, it's not that clear? Okay. فأما من أعطى واتقى, that who gives and is reverent, and then وصدق بالحسنى, and attests or believes in what is most beautiful. You pause here and reflect upon the layers. If you truly reflect and you let the layers permeate your soul. I mean, again, Grace was earlier talking about angry people. Angry people stand at the superficial. They talk about Islam, but they don't reflect upon the words of the Quran and let the words of the Quran permeate the soul. It's like watering a plant. If somehow you've got at the surface something that repels water, that plant is going to die. Because the water needs to go through the soil to the roots. The words of the Quran, you could pause at the words of the Quran superficially, or you can let these words permeate your soul and transform the very molecules of your brain, the very cells of your brain. So when Allah comes and says, notice here, فَأَمَّا مَنْ أَعْطَى, who gives, first gives, second, وَاتَّقَى, is reverent. Reverent of what? Towards Allah. وَصَدَّقَ بِالْحُسْنَى. Okay, so first action. If you speak about good and talk about beliefs, but you don't do, it's a non-starter. The barakah of Allah, the blessing, is not going to come. You can't sit on your rear and on social media in our day and age and pontificate. You want to heal, you want Allah's barakah, you want Allah's blessings, go do. Do good. فَأَمَّا مَنْ أَعْطَى, gives. Now, and here, he didn't say فَأَمَّا مَنْ صَلَّى, فَأَمَّا مَنْ أَعْطَى, to help others. Help like freeing slaves, freeing prisoners, feeding the poor, the stories that either of Abu Bakr or the second narrative of you. Let's see whether you do good. And that is why the Prophet ﷺ says that Allah helps a human being as long as that human being is helping others. You want Allah to be on your side, be on other human beings' side. If you don't do, then ittaqa, reverence of the divine, the healing you were talking about, the reverence of the divine, the feeling of the divine will not come. That is why, there are so many kids that come and say, I do my 5 prayers, I do dua, but I don't feel what you feel. You seem to really believe, but I don't feel that. Why is it that I don't feel that? I say, what good have you done? You want Allah to be on your side, to make you feel in your salah, not wander around, not daydream as you do your salah, to actually, when you do your salah, you find your tears rolling down. When you listen to Qur'an, you find a deep sense of comfort. Do good. Give money. Donate your time. Without doing good, all the stuff you're talking about is a non-starter. Now, وَصَدَّقَ بِالْحُسْنَى, Muslim scholars pause there, and I like the translation because they captured a little bit of the subtlety here, and attests to what is most beautiful. At the first level, وَصَدَّقَ بِالْحُسْنَى, we all know that the reverence here is to believing in Allah. But it is not just believing in Allah, but in believing in goodness itself. Because there are those people who believe in Allah, and it's amazing that you were talking about what you were talking about. I told you guys, we never coordinate. I don't even know what she's going to talk about until we'll talk about. But it's really interesting because there are people who believe in Allah, but they don't believe in goodness, which is an oxymoron. They really believe that everything is so ugly, and they're sort of they're deeply skeptical. Skepticism, this level of skepticism, makes your belief in Allah superficial and forecloses the doors of barakah. Allah is a beautiful thing. Belief in Allah is a beautiful thing. Allah Jameel, beautiful. You can't believe in this, that beauty cannot touch your heart unless you understand that in the same way you believe in Allah, you must believe in the beauty that Allah creates. That is why if you do any training in ta'abbud, a good sheikh will tell you the first rule is husn al-dhann billah, that when you must think well of Allah. If you start your worship, ibadah, and you don't believe, you are skeptical that Allah will do good by you, that will be an enormous obstacle, because it's a self-defeating proposition. Allah عند ظن العبد به, that Allah, if you think ill of Allah, Allah doesn't come to your aid. If you think well of Allah, Allah will come to your aid. It's like taking one step towards Allah takes 10 steps towards you. But taking a step towards, as the famous hadith says, but تصديق بالحسنى, to believe in beauty. Like, a lot of Muslims, when I wrote the Search for Beauty in Islam, would come to me and say, what is beauty? Do we really know what is beauty? Can we really believe in beauty? My answer is, you cannot be a Muslim if you don't believe in beauty. If you don't believe in beauty, then I don't know what your belief in Allah is. Because if Allah tells you, I am beautiful, and what I do is beautiful, then you come and say, I don't know that there is beauty. Then how do you know that there is Allah? Allah is beauty. And the belief in one leads to the belief in the other. Huh? Oh, okay. So let's pray Maghrib and then we'll continue. Inshallah, we'll finish the... Well, actually, I should say that. I'll try to finish it. It's foundational. I truly believe that there are Muslims who reflect upon the Qur'an, and there are Muslims who take a shortcut by skipping over the Qur'an and go directly to Islam. And that is a non-starter. You rediscover your Islam by rebuilding your relationship with the Qur'an. Make it your friend. Make the words of the Qur'an talk to you personally. In every surah, Allah is talking to you personally and building your character as what type of Muslim Allah wants you to be. Look at this prayer. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, so...
Do you want to just say make an announcement? So we're going to end the Tafsir, like official Tafsir part at 8 o'clock, and then we'll do a short Q&A.
Yeah, for whoever wants to stay.
For whoever wants to stay, and then we'll probably continue next Halaqa. Sorry.
إن سعيكم لشتى فمن أعطى واتقى وصدق بالحسنى. You are diverse. You will do good and bad, as male and female. You're interestingly the amount of comment, the amount of in the commentaries, the underscoring by so many of the mufassirun that being male or female doesn't dispose you towards either good or bad. Now, of course, in our day and age, this is something that doesn't catch our attention, but think of, in the medieval era, that was a revolutionary idea, because it was very inconsistent with the theological paradigms that you found among rabbinic Judaism and also among Catholic Christianity, which at the time was the only Christianity until, of course, the Reformation. The concept, the idea that women were predisposed to doing bad, while men either are neutral or predisposed to doing good, depending on which theologian you're reading, was very dominant. But in and you find this, by the way, in the Kalam literature, where Christian theologians in particular would often argue with Muslim theologians, well, as evidence that you're a false religion, you guys don't believe that the obvious thing that Hawa, Eve, is predisposed towards evil. What's wrong with you? And there are various responses that Muslim theologians would have to this point. But it is among some people that, although the Mufassirun never raised the issue of fitna literature in this context, but I think we can think about it. For those Muslims who tend to see women as somehow fitna prone or defective or whatever, Allah, who created the rhythm of creation, the mizan, the balance, and Allah who's created is the same Allah, the same God that created female and male to complete each other, and said that you will be diverse, and there is universal law. Those of you who give and revere Allah, and ittaqa, are mindful of Allah, and being mindful without it having consequences upon your behavior is not ittaqa. Taqwa is to be mindful and in a way that actually influences your behavior. That's the ittaqaytu shay means I thought about something and I took actions in response to my thinking about something. That is why it is so difficult to translate the word taqwa. When you find translators struggling with taqwa, because we don't have in English a word that carries the same connotation. Theoretically you could revere something, but it not affect your behavior. You just have a theoretical, abstract reverence. But that's not taqwa. Taqwa shay is that it affects you. It affects your behavior. So, أعطى واتقى وصدق بالحسنى. Okay, so believing in husna, believing in the Lord and God and Allah, and believing in husn itself, both as a possibility and a reality, that it is possible and it is realizable through Allah. Now here is the completion of the equation, which is quite it's astoundingly beautiful. فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْيُسْرَى. We shall ease their way unto ease. An acceptable translation. سَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْيُسْرَى. Meaning, you take the initiative and Allah facilitates. Again, going back to what your Grace was talking about. You take the steps in believing in Allah and believing in beauty, and Allah comes to empower the steps you take. But if you do not take the steps, not just in belief but in action, in giving, in the willingness to sacrifice the self and sacrifice its egoism and its desire to covet and control and in other words, its tendency to ta'lih al-zat, to itself become divine. Then Allah will facilitate. In this context, you find this in Tafsir al-Razi and in all the major tafsirs. There is often a discussion about predestination, and Razi even will talk about the Mu'tazila and their ideas in this context and so on. I don't want to get into the entire thing about predestination. That, well, you know, if are there people from the moment of creation predestined to hell and predestined to heaven, and that's a discussion that they get into. I don't believe that. I don't believe in predestination in that sense, and I think it's extremely problematic at so many levels. But and there's an enormous difference between Allah's knowledge and predestination. They're two separate things. In philosophy and in theology and in everything. But note that when the Prophet ﷺ says, كُلٌّ مُيَسَّرٌ إِلَى مَا خُلِقَ لَهُ, meaning that this is a very profound hadith and it's difficult to translate. Each person is created with propensities, inclinations, intuitions, talents. If you understand the self, Allah will facilitate your path towards what you have been created for. لِمَا خُلِقَ لَهُ. There are people that fight with themselves. Allah has given them talents to be one way or the other. And they, for whatever reasons, are not at peace with that. And these are the conflicted people and the people that often have the most difficult time. The reason I bring up this hadith is that this hadith is always cited in the context of this particular part of Surah Layl. فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْيُسْرَى. Part of belief is to believe in Allah's promise to you. When Allah tells you, I will, if you believe and if you do your part, you give, you have taqwa, and you believe in me and in goodness, in beauty, then I will come to your aid. Husn al-dhann billah, that you think well of Allah. Because I am sometimes surprised at how many people I meet who are like the comedians that Grace once talked about. They say they're Muslim, but they say the most inappropriate things about Allah. It's as if they're Muslim, but they're at war with Allah. It doesn't work. It just does not work. If you want Allah on your side, you reach a point where you understand what Allah gives you and what Allah wants for you, and you are at peace with that. And you, in fact, beyond being at peace with it, you love what Allah gives you. What Allah facilitates your way is what you love. You embrace it simply because it comes from Allah. That is the iman that you aspire for, to reach that point of comfort with your own iman. And it is truly a relationship of khaliliyah, that you are in a companionship. Okay, now the opposite. وَأَمَّا مَنْ بَخِلَ وَاسْتَغْنَى. Now note here, notice right away, again, as for those who are miserly and deem themselves beyond need, we'll pause with that for a second, and denies what is most beautiful, we shall ease their way into hardship. We need to pause with the translation a bit. Okay. وَأَمَّا مَنْ بَخِلَ وَاسْتَغْنَى. No, again, it is the actions that will erode the beliefs. You meet people, they might, and I've had several situations like this where, people that I knew when we were younger, when we were young men or growing up, and they seemed to me very promising. And then I meet them later on in their careers. They're policemen, they're soldiers, they're lawyers, they're doctors. And then I notice that whatever light used to shine from them, whatever goodness used to be part of their aura is gone. It's no longer there. And I realize, and they still pray, and so on, but it is their actions that eroded. It is the way they conducted their life that eroded their spirits and their auras. One of the first keys and the nature of a believer is that a believer is not miserly, because miserliness in itself is lack of belief in Allah. When you say, this is mine and I will not share, what you are saying is that I don't trust the one who gave me to give me again. And I refuse to share because this is mine. Well, the very idea of coveting property is inconsistent with the very paradigm of Iman. And that is why you find that the Qur'an again and again and again and again emphasizes to you the key to belief is the giving of others. But if you don't have money to give, then you have time to give. And if you don't have time to give, you can even give at a minimum your dua. And by the way, a lot of Muslims will say, yes, I do dua for you, but they actually don't. Doing dua it takes the investment of time, of words, and energy and time to actually articulate the dua. That's giving. We just saying, yes, I do dua for you, I'll keep you in my dua. You have to do it. You have to do it. When you say, please do dua for me, you have to do dua for me. In actually articulating it, spending the time, staying after prayer to actually do the dua for this person and that person and your neighbors and your family, it's giving. And not doing so is a form of miserliness. Okay, now, أَمَّا مَنْ بَخِلَ, and notice here وَاسْتَغْنَى. They translate it, which, they get to sort of the literal meaning, and deems himself beyond need. This, al-istighna, it's not really deem yourself beyond need, but deem yourself self-sufficient. That you think in terms of what my work, my earnings, my profits, my property. That's istighna. Allah is not part of the equation of my work, my money, my property, my. And istighna is to be intellectually and psychologically self-sufficient from the divine. And when even the modern day those people who go around saying, well, we believe in the religion of humanity. The crux of their philosophical foundations is that a human being is autonomous and needs no connection to the heavens. Well, that's the heart of kufr. That's the heart of what lack of belief is. The minute a human being is like that is the minute when their faith erodes. When you start believing that what good befalls me because of me, and what bad befalls me because I'm unlucky or I'm cursed or because someone is plotting against me or because I'm married to a loser or because whatever, instead of thinking that no, whatever good or bad befalls you, Allah is an intimate part of this equation. That's istighna. Now, so then it is endlessly fascinating that bukh and istighna was put before وَكَذَّبَ بِالْحُسْنَى, because it is the way you navigate and conduct yourself is what will eventually erode your soul and your psychology, where you no longer believe either in the God or in goodness itself. The skeptics. I mean, I don't know if how it is in outside academia, but there's sort of like a fad to be skeptical to the point that you don't even believe that humanity is worth saving, Earth is worth saving, anything is worth anything because I'm cool and I'm a skeptic. Well, that's takzib al-husna. When you get to the point where you even say, humanity just is doomed because we're going to destroy the earth. I want to invest money, instead of investing money in helping the poor, you invest money in finding a way to colonize Mars. Every time I hear one of these people, they're usually very rich, people talk this way. No, I'm not going to spend money on feeding anyone or taking care of the homeless because I want to invest money in colonizing Mars. I always think of Kazzab al-Husna. And what is the result of that? Allah answers, فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْعُسْرَةِ. Now notice here, when Allah says, فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْعُسْرَةِ, we will ease their way, we will allow them to suffer the consequences of the foundations they've laid in usra, in hardship. Now, of course, some have said, well, that also refers to hellfire, and I agree. I mean, but before Jahannam, before they even get to hellfire, their life on this earth is going to be misery. They will never taste. And again, I'm sort of a little bit dumbfounded by what Grace said at the beginning, because of just the overlaps, that you are going to be a miserable human being and you're going to stay a miserable human being. You'll never taste peace. You will never taste the sweetness of Iman, that sense of repose and tranquility and genuine happiness that comes only from the Allah's grace, the barakah that comes to you from Allah. Am I forgetting anything?
Number 9.
Okay. فَسَنُيَسِّرُهُ لِلْعُسْرَةِ. Now, وَمَا يُغْنِي عَنْهُ مَالُهُ إِذَا تَرَدَّى. And his wealth shall not avail him when he perishes. Okay. We pause here at the word تَرَدَّى. وَمَا يُغْنِي عَنْهُ مَالُهُ إِذَا تَرَدَّى. the wealth is not going to avail them anything. Taradda is a profoundly eloquent and multi-layered word. Arada is death. So at one level, it means when they die, all that wealth that corrupted their soul, that made them think of colonize Mars instead of helping other human beings, it's not going to avail them anything. You will die and leave everything. But taradda also can mean, other than death, deterioration and tumbling downwards. So, for instance, if you say taradda al-wada, means the situation has deteriorated. Taradda al-iqtisad, the economy has deteriorated. So, as so many have pointed out, that is as if Allah is not as if, but Allah is still is also saying that takzeeb al-husna will result in the deterioration of your condition, in your falling apart, not just as death, and not just as hellfire, the natural accountability that comes from failing to embrace what is beautiful in your life and doing well in the test, but that the material wealth is not going to avail you anything as you deteriorate as a human being. And so, and this has, I wonder if the people who wrote these commentaries would have seen our modern world and seen things like the way we deteriorate the environment, the way that all the ailments that humanity is afflicted with, when we've chosen skepticism as a way of life and materialism as a way of life and set aside the spiritual and Allah and revelation as a core of our being. It's always fascinating. Inna alayna lal huda. See, because Amanda's not here, so I'm not here.
Read it.
No, that's a good one. Truly ours is to give guidance. Inna alayna lal huda. Now, inna alayna lal huda, I mean, it's a good translation. But there is a further point, and Razi puts it well. اللازم علينا في الحكمة إذا خلقنا الخلق للعبادة أن نبين لهم وجه التعبد and so on and so forth. That now it is as if Allah is pointing our attention and telling us, please remember, or do remember, that if we created you, if God created you, and God created the laws of the cosmos, and God even created the laws of what uplifts a spirit and what degrades a spirit, it is not possible that Allah would leave you without guidance. Guidance from the divine, when Razi says, الذي يجب علينا في الحكمة, what he's talking about here, what he refers to by hikmah, are the necessary philosophical premises for a belief in God. That's what hikmah refers to. That, and this of course again, in our day and age is relevant to ultra-secular Muslims, secular in the sense that those who say we believe, but they really don't have a role for the divine. God, in the same way that God created the laws of the cosmos, it is in the same way that Allah wrote mercy upon Allah's self, Allah also wrote guidance upon Allah's self. It is incumbent that Allah provides us the path to guidance. It is, as many have pointed out, that it is an assurance from Allah that this book, this revelation, is your path to guidance. That, so again, to Muslims who are lost, God told you, Inna alayna lal huda. Guidance is incumbent upon Allah, and so that also means that if you truly believe in Allah, you must believe that guidance comes from Allah, and which is an invitation to engage Allah's revelation, searching for that guidance. Okay, we'll take وَإِنَّ لَنَا لَلْآخِرَةَ وَالْأُولَى, and then we'll stop there. That's the natural. What time is it?
7:55.
Oh, okay. I usually have no sense of time, but I'm actually done good this time. Okay, وَإِنَّ لَنَا لَلْآخِرَةَ وَالْأُولَى. Yeah, and truly unto us belong the hereafter and this world. The only, and again, it's a good translation. Not just life on this earth and the hereafter, but remember that wherever, and this is why in this context Allah says al-akhirah wal-ula, the end and the beginning. That ultimately, wherever it is, wherever you start or whatever is you end, it is in Allah's hands. And that is truly what Iman is. That wherever I commence the journey and wherever the journey ends up taking me, it is thoroughly in Allah's hands. If you are able to internalize that, that is the crux of Iman. So Allah is assuring us that this earth and the hereafter is in Allah's hands, in the same way that night and day are in Allah's hands, a continuation of existence are in Allah's hands. In the same way that whether you are born male or female is in Allah's hands, in the same way that guidance is in Allah's hands, the beginning and the end. Ultimately, wherever you go and whatever you do, it is thoroughly in Allah's hands. Am I forgetting anything?
Number 9, did I miss? وَكَذَّبَ بِالْحُسْنَى.
Oh no, I sort of no, we covered that. Or maybe you this is the part where you don't believe in Allah and you don't believe in goodness itself, in the possibility of goodness. So he translates it and denies what is most beautiful. He didn't capitalize beautiful because, which is actually smart from the translators of this Qur'an, because he understands that it is not just a reference to the divine, but also a reference to the very existence of what is beautiful. Okay, so my guess is that next Halaqa, inshallah, will finish Surah Layl and probably begin Surah Al-Shams. I mean, Surah Al-Shams will take us a little bit, so it's good if we cover a part of Surah Al-Shams and then finish the rest, inshallah, the following. Okay, so shall we officially stop here?